I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. James Rennell entered hospitality from a different angle to many of my previous guests. His background is in property. This means a unique perspective from a business background. Hospitality lured me into, and you'll find out why on the show today. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to the show, James.
Thank you for having me.
No worries at all, no worries at all. James, the first question I like to ask is if you have a crazy hospitality story.
Anybody who's in hospitality would realise that we get one of those a day at least.
Yes.
It's always challenging dealing with the public, and public's always right. I mean, I think the craziest one I had was one of our customers giving a little bit of a demonstration about how lovely the space was and moving their hands around and pointing towards one of the old 100-year-old beams or posts in the complex, and ended up getting a splinter straight up their finger.
Oh no.
They had to go to hospital to get the splinter removed, and they came back the next week to tell us that that was the story.
Yeah.
Which we were very apologetic, but their next response was, well, I think you should now set me up to have free coffee.
What?
And we went, yeah, okay, let's think about that. I mean, we were very sympathetic to the fact that that happened, but I don't think we were responsible for putting the splinter up the finger. But, you get crazy requests from crazy people. And
it would be silly to go walking around running your hand along wooden surfaces, but I mean, this is obviously an accident. And it's mustn't have been a small splinter anyway, it must have been something huge.
It was only a small splinter, but anyway, the amazing how people think if things go wrong in your cafe, then you're completely liable. But anyway.
James, the next question I want to ask you is because a lot of people dive into what they do, but I like to start with why. Simon Sinek, Start With Why was an incredible book, and I like to start with why. So why do you do what you do?
My wife and I have an absolute love of food and coffee. In separate lives before we got together, we both had that ambition to kind of somewhere go out and find the best damn coffee we could find, and supported by the best food. And it's amazing the amount of places we got to where you might get great food and then you want to finish off with that really special coffee, and it doesn't happen. And often you'll get it the other way around, where you'll go and have a great coffee and you want to have a nice breakfast, and it's not supported. I think Brisbane's come of age with that. The combination of a cafe producing great coffee and great food has changed dramatically. But 5-6 years ago when we got into this, that was what we were burning for. So,
yes.
We're not hospitality. We don't come from that background. We've both been in businesses, me more so than my wife, but she comes from a federal government bent just in the last 10-12 years. But she's a foodie from way back, having come off property at Mullaney, being involved in the Mullaney Dairy Mullaney Co-op for many years. So she's a very organic, earthy kind of girl in that she likes to know the provenance of food, where it comes from, and the quality of food. So not something that's sort of thrown up at us by the Coles and Woolies of the world, but something that we source locally and limited food miles, and it's got a provenance. So that's kind of a journey that she likes to take. And I suppose I was the major coffee snob, so for me it had to be all about the coffee.
What was it then really that attracted you to hospitality? Was it that love of food?
Well, to be honest, I had a barista who was a very good friend of my goddaughter's. He targeted me for several years, saying he wanted to get into the coffee business again because he'd gotten out of it and gotten into management with Victoria Coffee. He convinced me over a number of years to be the investor or silent partner.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's how I fell into it. And when he had had enough and burnt himself out and disappeared to Melbourne, I was left with either closing the cafe or taking it on with some of these things that I'd learned about running a small business like that. My wife had always wanted to own a coffee shop since coming out of the Mullaney Co-op, and the journey began. So starting in 52 square metres, and then morphing into a space of over 250 square metres with a 200 square metre al fresco outside area. has been quite a massive journey for us. So it's not just about the coffee and the food anymore, it's about creating a space and being event hosts, because we hold a lot of events inside our cafe now, whether it's weddings, engagements and so on. So that's the 5-year snapshot, but what got me in was someone just encouraging me to do it. So I always felt, stick to your knitting. I'm property, and I love my property development. Seeing it from the other side, probably as a developer, just helps me understand where costs sit. So I'm probably a lot more sympathetic now to potential tenants about the rental costs. I mean, when they exceed a reasonable percentage of what you're turning over, it's pretty hard to make a point. So it's a tough old gig out there.
What is a reasonable percentage at the moment?
Shouldn't be any more than 30%, I feel. I mean, you get rents in your Westfields way exceeds that. I mean, they're pushing for rents that, with rental growth over 5-year terms of leases, that are unsustainable. And that's why you find a lot of these small food groups and, your horrible homogenised sort of food courts sort of falling out of favour with a lot of the, great tenants. So all we've got is our typical national tenants that we've all had enough of, and that's why we're running around chasing food trucks everywhere, and we want something different.
I'm interested in, obviously your background's coming into what you're doing at the moment, but before we get into that, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about what you do. So tell us a bit about even where we are and what you've been doing over those 6-7 years you just described there.
It was an interesting journey for me to understand a lot about competition and critical mass. So those two things are very key to business. When I started in this light industrial space behind a roller door, 50-something square metres, I was the only coffee shop in the area. And we did exceptionally well. So well that other parts of the industry were sort of visiting us and talking about how busy we were, the queues, the great coffee, and so on. Wasn't too long, within the next 18 months, we had 3 cafes in this light industrial area. I think we've now got 5, with potentially a 6th open around the corner. That's where you've got the monopoly in an area, and I think most cafes want that. Depending on the size, if you're a 50-something square metre cafe, you're relying on local business, people walking in, so local community. When you exceed that, you can, and you provide a great food offering, well, you're drawing from pretty much Greater Brisbane. People want a different experience, come weekends, they might hunt you down through social media and so on. But the transition from 50 square metre cafe to 200 and something with a massive alfresco area has been overcoming the challenges of competition in the area. Realising that, the pie is only so big when you talk local community and local business. And as these other coffee shops open, you learn that they're not really business people. They don't go in with a business model. They don't think about what they're doing in terms of the size and scale of that cafe and what effect it's going to have on everybody else's business. So the only way that you can combat that is to scale up and move from a local community-based type business to a Brisbane-based business. And that's really what we've done. So the business model for us is about scaling up kitchen, moving from cake and coffee to full scale, 3 chefs we've got employed, 1's French trained, and so the quality of the food, staffing up, realising that we have other businesses and interests, my wife and I, so we need managers. And so we have a full-time manager and something like about 13 casual staff at the moment. So it's become quite a business. So for the last 5-6 years, asking what that transition's been, it's actually been about surviving in the location and thinking about how to make the business adapt to the conditions. And in a sense, take advantage of the critical mass. If you stay small, you don't take advantage of the critical mass because it just diminishes the pie. If you change your model and you can morph into something much bigger, which we had the opportunity to do, you take advantage of the critical mass because everybody comes into the area. Those smaller cafes are too busy, they don't offer the same level of food that we do, and so you end up getting the trade. That's the journey. So
to stick with your analogy there, does that then expand the pie?
No, what it does is, in a pie graph, it actually hopefully gets us to the point where we're 80% of that pie. Whether that expands it or not for others as part of that critical mass, I don't know. It probably does, probably has a net effect. If we're all on social media and we're all drawing people from certain areas based on a great Instagram photo or something that might be trending at the time, then I think that probably helps. But I think for us, it's about increasing that level of market share. So, that's how it's worked for us. And I guess that's the business side, the business acumen coming in. And realising that ultimately, do we want to be in this business long term? Probably not. We own the building, spending a lot of money on developing what was a light industrial space now into food and beverage. We're fully licensed now, so that took an 18-month journey through council, conditioning them, then getting our liquor licence. Now that we've got that, we're building a business that is easily going to turn over well over $2 million, and you're not going to do that over a 50 square metre space. That makes it very saleable with the liquor licence plus, that earning capacity. And ultimately, we want to sell the business and probably become property owners. So as much as we love hospitality and we think we're good at it because we run it like a business, so we're thinking about every aspect, percentages and margins, and just really fully conditioning the kitchen to know our margins on food. We know our margins on coffee. Working through all that helps you get through your month by month. But the ultimate goal for us is to be just landlords and have this great business by great operators that we have a good relationship with, if they own the business and can carry it forward over the next 10 years. I hate the idea of cafes coming and going. To me, it's about building a legacy. So legacy projects are great in any market, but with cafes, there's one or two amazing cafes in Brisbane that have that legacy, and they transcend all other iterations of cafes and whatever's theming at the time. So,
what are those cafes that really stand out to you in Brisbane?
Well, traditionally...
Or sorry to interrupt you there, or Australia-wide as well.
Well, that's a good question, because Australia-wide is very different to Brisbane. So, go local first. I've got many, but there would be one that I'll harp back to that has been going now by Vince and Maria, which is the New Farm Deli. There's two great business people, but they sold it maybe 8 years ago, hugely successful, and probably thought, why do we do that? They end up buying it back again. They've doubled the size of it. It just is always busy. And, they get the deli section right, they get the food right, they've got great staff, and they're always there as managers. So that's a sort of an iconic cafe, really. And if you don't go there for 2-3 years, you go back and it's just exactly the same, and it's great. It's got that great energy about it. So it's cool. So that's a local one. I could give you others, but I think that's a good standout one. In terms of national, I think in recent times, the one that stood out for me and has become a bit of an international flagship about what you've got to do beyond just being a cafe would be the Grounds of Alexandria. So it's in an industrial area in Alexandria in Sydney. They took over a couple of commercial buildings and created a massive car park in one. But essentially, as a cafe, restaurant, they used to roast all their own coffee there in the early days, I believe. That roastery is still there, but I don't think it's operable now. It's just this gorgeous space that you can sit in. But they've got all these zones from potting shed, which essentially is plants and flowers, and that's fully active, to other food offerings that occur where you can go out and buy a sausage and a roll or a burger, which is kind of in the yard, which is a major alfresco area. I mean, they've got petting areas, so they've got kids can go along there and see the baby lambs, and I think they've got I forget the name of the pig now. Kevin Bacon is the name of the pig. So Kevin Bacon's quite famous because he went missing at one stage, but then he found his way back to the cafe. So Kevin Bacon's there, so you can see a massive pig in the yard, and it's just interesting. They've got function spaces. If you look at the fit out and you look at how well it's been done and how over years it's continued to evolve, it sets a whole new standard, because what it's doing, I think, is the way retail was kind of heading. And that is, it's actually not about selling the coffee or selling the food. It's about doing everything other than that. I mean, it's about connecting with people. It's about creating a community. It's about the experience. It's about, you can find all sorts of things other than just opening the door and being a cafe.
Yes. That
makes you a standout and draws you in. Grounds of Alexandria now is talked about globally as the as sort of best practice about how retail is heading. So moving away from the sterile version of how we used to retail to something that's much more. It's about the whole experience. Yeah, that would be my national one. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you for those. A question that I have for you is, obviously we're confined by the space and the traffic that you can get to a particular location. How do you scale that business? Is it a matter of you just simply have to open another store, or can you really scale from an individual location?
It's an interesting question because, a cafe or, we're bordering on restaurant when we come to breakfast and lunch. But I mean, it's all about covers. So at the end of the day, we're sitting at around about 110 seats in this space at the moment. That 110 seats, we could throw easily another 100 in the space that we've got. But in doing that, you're changing the dynamic somewhat. And I think you're maxing it out. You're particularly maxing it out when it comes to the scale of kitchen and capacity. So for us, the 110 seats is about the kitchen. So our limiting factor is how much food we can produce at a peak period, like a Saturday, Sunday trade, morning trade, from about 10 o'clock through to lunchtime. It's about how we can make that kitchen work and limiting our wait times to no more than 20 minutes. In terms of scaling up, the limitations are what you can produce, and scale and size of kitchen is absolutely is pivotal to that. In terms of coffee, we've got a 3 group, La Mazzocca. It's about as good as we can get at the moment. We've got a strata coming. In fact, we do our training on that this week on Wednesday with all the baristas. That thing will, with the fact that we've got 4 roasts from single origin, dark roast, light roast, and our autumn, providing choice in coffee. I mean, we can knock out over 100 kilos a week, so we've got no issue with coffee. Coffee is not a problem for us. You can scale up on that. We just have 2 baristas running that machine full time, and it can really crank it out. But the kitchen's the limiting factor. In most businesses, I think is smaller businesses are defined by number of seats, and honestly, it's kitchen size, because even the smallest cafe can punch out 100 kilos of coffee. So for me, it's about kitchen space, just the ability to cook vast numbers of meals within 20 minutes and being compressed to that, and seating capacity. So I think scalability is a really good question. So then moving outside of those peak hours where you might be busy up until lunchtime in a traditional cafe, working into the areas of evenings with our liquor licence and being able to offer dinner, that's very important. So you've got to think about alternative ways to make your cafe or space function, and other income streams. You pay rent, you're paying rent every minute of the day, so you really need to try and produce income. And profitable income from any time that you're, otherwise traditionally closed. I mean, one of the things that we decided to do was to move into the area of saying most cafes close at 2:30. We felt that was too soon. There are only a few cafes that run beyond 2:30. We decided to run it through till 5. That was an initiative of ours on the basis that the casual staff wanted more hours. So we felt that we could invest in them by giving them more hours, as long as we covered our costs. So we knew what we needed to do from a 2:30 close. We explained to the staff that if you're there and you're not busy, then you could do a lot more cleaning, some deep cleaning, get into areas that other people don't get into, which you now find in our cafe is fantastic. So we've got a very clean, tidy cafe, but gives the staff more hours. But what's ended up happening is we've had to end up putting a second staff member on now. So between 2:30 and 5, we're extremely busy because we've become the cafe that's known to be open up until 5 o'clock. You still get a coffee. So we're always prepared to push into other areas that people aren't necessarily comfortable with. Most people are exhausted pushing out however many kilos of coffee from a 5:30 or 6 o'clock start in the morning, and they can't wait to get out of the cafe by 2:30. We've got a different philosophy, and so it's paid dividends for us in that space. Probably that's about as much as I can think about from a scalability point of view. But, any business, limiting factors,
That obviously brings other challenges with it as well, because, I mean, if you're open for 12 hours, you might not keep the same staff member on, or members on, so they have to change over then, and then there's a handover, and then they have to know what's going on. Whereas if it's the 2 o'clock or 2:30 close, they can stay on and all do it themselves. So there are all sorts of other factors that come into play there. Thank you for those insights. The next question I like to ask you is, how do you guys market the brand?
Having owned a lot of businesses in the past, the thing that challenges me with marketing, and I'm talking traditional marketing, building brand equity for one cafe not a chain, can't be done the traditional way. It's just not possible to have that amount of money, spend that amount of money getting brand equity around, one single cafe. So, for me, I always look at marketing like that. I always just refer to it as arrows in the dark. You're firing all these arrows, you've got absolutely no idea what you're hitting. And so for me, it's never cost effective. So I'm anti those traditional marketing tools. And we've moved beyond that, I think. To a degree, you can kind of see the way marketing's occurred with social media and what it actually means now and how you market. I mean, Instagram, Facebook, even podcasts and different things. There are many, many ways to market a single brand cost effectively. I think that's where social media has been fantastic for small business.
Yes.
What you've got to do is come to terms with what that looks like. So I'm not from that era. I'm a little bit more on the mature side, but I've had to evolve. So very, very quickly we've realised what it is that actually tweaks people's interest. What is it that brings people into a cafe? What is it that if you're trying to appeal to Greater Brisbane, for example, for your small business, what would make them want to come in and try your food? And one thing that hasn't changed is a picture tells 1,000 words. These days it's a photograph. So, Instagram has become a really powerful tool to be able to demonstrate exactly what your kitchen does. And there's no better way to do that than having someone professionally plate up a meal. We might be a cafe, we're not a restaurant, but it's incredibly important that when that food's presented to someone, it's not only great food, but it looks amazing. So the thing that you want and the true test is to actually put a plate in front of somebody. And I saw it just this weekend where one woman was so blown away by the presentation of the food, she had to actually say to her girlfriend in front of her, I never photograph my food, but I'm sorry, I'm going to have to photograph this and post it. And she did. It's that level of engagement that generates the interest. And what better way to do it? We might boost some of our food if it's a great post. Just recently, we're very dog friendly. So front of house we don't have dogs, but we've got the yard with dogs. We've got the function space at the back where we allow people to bring their dogs in as well. It's a fine line between what's legal and what's not legal. But they have relaxed a lot around about dogs, and we wanted to post the fact that we're a dog friendly cafe. So that was a good one to boost. So you can pay a few dollars, it's not a lot to boost. So that's an area where we get a lot of engagement, and it's the old story, if you're talking dogs and you're talking cafe, you hashtag both of those, and it's amazing how the word can get round, and it sort of generates an interest around what it is you're trying to target in terms of that marketing segment.
It's interesting that this movement into the digital sphere, and this emergence of a digital sphere which wasn't around, it's putting all the onus of marketing thought onto the small business rather than a marketer. There's obviously the marketing space, particularly digital marketing, is huge and even bigger than it was because, I suppose it didn't exist.
Yeah, I agree.
But those sorts of thought processes weren't happening before, were they?
No, they weren't. And I think that's one of the pitfalls. There's a lot of things that people get wrong when they go into business. And if I've seen it once, I've seen it 100 times over the years, where people think that it's just an easy entry to come into the cafe space and hospitality. There is so much to it. And making a good coffee, which, if someone spends a fair bit of time on a machine, gets some great training, and they've punched out, hundreds of kilos of coffee, they get really good at it. It's not just about making the coffee. It's not just about putting the food on the table and being good at maybe making some food. What happens in and underneath a business like that are all the things you don't think about. And that's where people fail. So some people are really good at the entrepreneurial approach of opening a cafe, but then it becomes very mundane. Opening at 6 a.m. and doing the same thing day in, day out. It's like going to your hairdresser. You go to your hairdresser once every 4 to 6 weeks, and that hairdresser has to have a chat with you. We get to do that every day with our customers. And it can get a bit tiring, but we love our customers too. But it's quite challenging, I think I'd like the once every 6 weeks as opposed to once every day. Baristas have to be charismatic. Front of house have to be charismatic. You've got to be pleasant the whole time. The staff that have to come through me before they actually put in front of the public. If I tell them once I see them smiling, they're going to be drilled, because a smile costs nothing and it just puts people at ease. So, it's so many things to running a small business that that you don't think. I mean, after 3, 4, 5, 6 years of running a business like that, you've still got a smile. It's pretty tough for people, But yeah, I mean, the mechanics of running a business, I think a lot of people get that wrong, and they just don't concentrate on it. So, getting back to the digital age and marketing, one of the things they go into it with is a really naive version of what a social media campaign would look like through social media. It's just unthought of. Whereas, really, if you make great coffee and you're doing good food, spend 3-4 months, spend 6 months building up a business plan that might tell you exactly how you're going to unlock each of those components, and marketing being a really important one.
Yes.
I mean, digital disruption, as they call it, is happening through so many things. Airbnb and Uber, great examples of what's happened here in Australia and globally. Being able to remove yourself from big marketing firms or even small marketing firms and not have to worry about an annual budget of 10, 20 grand or something like that to market in magazines, or where you think you might generate interest, and being able to come up with your own campaign through social media, boosting just occasionally, and actually knowing how to target what you're doing and knowing what's going to sell your product, whether it's coffee you're selling or food, breakfast menu or a lunch menu. It's really got to be thought through.
I feel like it's understanding humans on a more fundamental level than we've had to before, and we now have the tools to be able to target them on that level. So I just find it super interesting and going through that journey myself to explore those new things.
With that type of exposure, being a one-branded cafe, it's a double-edged sword to social media. You get one thing wrong on the day and someone will just hammer you on social media. And, the one thing I hate is seeing that negativity. On Google, we've got a couple of platforms. We don't push too many on some of them, and it's funny how we've continued to target what we believe is the most important one. We will constantly get 5s, but, we've had a 1. You don't know whether that 1's been generated by someone saying you've got to go and give these guys a 1, but then when you see they haven't actually posted too many reviews before, you kind of think, it's a bit sceptical. But if you get it wrong on the day, it's really challenging to actually see a bad sort of rating come through. So, I think you've just got to let that take care of itself. You do everything right and it'll happen. And you're probably going to get 1 or 2 people that are unhappy. I mean, we just had a heat wave, 36 degrees or something. We had someone come into the cafe and said, we felt that your cafe was unbearably hot. And she posted it, and we think, it's pretty tough. It was a heat wave. Everybody else realised it was a heat wave. And maybe you needed to go and find a restaurant that was air conditioned, because we're not. We're an open space, al fresco, outdoors.
It is still very cool for the space it is.
So it was an interesting thing. So you can never please everybody.
Yes.
And that's that double-edged sword. So hugely powerful, social media, but it can be brutal as well.
I'd like to ask you, James, what you're learning about or exploring at the moment.
We're taking some inspiration from several venues, and I've named one already, which is the Grounds of Alexandria. The second venue that I draw inspiration from is the farm, Byron Bay. The farm, Byron Bay, if people haven't been there, they should go, because it's almost a tourist attraction on that northern New South Wales coastline now, so attached to Byron. It's just outside the traffic hub, which is great. You can come off the freeway and bob straight in without having to queue up to get into Byron proper. But it was a farm. It was I wouldn't say a massive working farm, but it's a farm. 3 Blue Ducks out of Sydney restaurant decided they want a bit of a change of lifestyle, and they decided to open a restaurant there. When you look at that model, you realise how important it is to have something that's interactive. The connectivity to the farm. I mean, I'm sure they can't possibly, because they're so busy there, they can't possibly produce everything off the farm that goes into the kitchen and through the menu seasonally. But you would have to say it's a damn good go at it, and it's in a location that's accessible to people. So families take their kids there. You can go and play with the ducks, see the pigs, walk around. Parents can sit out, have a fantastic meal. They've got a bakery there. They've got a florist selling flowers and a few other bits and pieces. I think it's an all-up experience. So it's a sort of a must-do. So taking example from the Grounds of Alexandria, with a space that we would love to be 3 times as big, but we've got up to 650 square metres of space here in total. It allows me to look creatively at not just about the coffee, not just about the food, but what are we doing in those spaces to actually bring people in. And we're evolving our space all the time. I've managed to find online 4 100-year-old ironbark trusses with a 13-metre span. For people who might understand what 13 metres means, it's a large span. Beautiful old trusses. They're sitting in the yard at the moment. Our journey over the next 6 weeks is to recreate those trusses into an aerial glasshouse, as I'm calling it. So essentially we're going to set them up with the bottom chords of the trusses at 3.6. We're going to glaze it and throw some battens in there, but we're just going to fill it full of plants. It's going to be aerated like a traditional glasshouse, but essentially that's going to be part of our outside alfresco area. Now, what we're doing there is setting up a precedent of saying, well, we're probably the first to create an outside space where you're actually sitting under a glasshouse, not in it. And so we really want that experience, and it'll be cooling, refreshing. We've got such an amazing climate here in Queensland that, you know, to use it through winter is going to be beautiful, and to have it through summer will be a really pleasant place to feel like you're cooling down. That's my thing, I suppose, is thinking outside of the successful model that we've got at the moment and saying, well, how can we reinvent? How can we improve the space? How can we improve people's experience about coming here? I love to go to venues and play this sort of discovery thing. And you walk around a venue, and if it's a big enough venue, you walk the next corner and you're seeing something else. And it's just a wonderful feeling when the food's right, the coffee's right, and, you know, the fit out's right, and then you just find this other thing. And I don't know, is it the endorphin? Something releases, and it's just this really powerful feeling inside. And I would like to think that we can achieve that. We see people walking in here and they walk to the back not realising that it's like the TARDIS. So they might sit in the front 120 square metre part of the cafe and then walk out the back and see the function space, and it's wonderful watching their facial expression and what it means to come out to the back and then just discover this other part of the cafe, which is the function space. So I think that's where my wife and I are passionate. We do a lot of the work ourselves. We recycle a lot of materials, like finding 100-year-old ironbark trusses that would have otherwise been demolished. We, paid the price, transported them here, and I just love the fact that we can put those into, and they've got a story, and they've got some provenance. I think it's lovely. So if we're going to enjoy it, we hope other people will enjoy it too.
Yes. I've just thought of another question as well regarding the digital space. Just a quick one on that one again. With reviews and whatnot, how much attention should people really pay to digital reviews? I mean, if you, like, a 1-star could literally be an accident, but it could be something serious as well. So how heavily should business owners weight that feedback?
Well, I'll give you a good example. The movie The Chef. I don't know whether you ever saw it. If you didn't, it's hilarious. Where the guy was a chef, restaurateur, and whatever else happened, he found himself doing getting a review by someone who critiqued his restaurant, and it destroyed his restaurant. But the reason why it destroyed it is because he took the review too seriously. And what he did was focus on the negative rather than the positive. And I think that's what's important. The more you focus on someone's negative review, you've got to deal with it. And I think it's important you respond in a polite way. And sometimes, you might actually take some advice from it, and it's fine. We've had some where we can take advice from it. We've had some where you just know it's vindictive. There's some reason this person's not had a great day, and they take it out on you. So you just deal with it and move on. The great analogy of the white page with the black dot, you ask someone to write about it, they'll always write about what the black dot means to them. They don't write about what the white page means to them. Right. It's a bit of an analogy, but it's a good analogy. And so the black dot's just a bad review, and you got to focus on the white page and just keep going and keep doing what you do well. That's the thing you got to focus on. So, as hard as it is to get a negative review, you got to move on. So I
first heard that analogy, the black dot on the white page, from an Uber driver a few years ago, and it was it's a good moment. It hit me when I really thought about it. But I want to sort of open that up just a little bit more, because I think that the problem or struggle that a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners go through is that they have a vision and they have to execute that vision and motivate and inspire people to fulfill that vision. But then we have to listen to feedback and adapt as well. So how do we find that balance between going, okay, cool, I'm taking your opinion on board, your customer feedback, and because you're constantly receiving it, especially if you ask for it, and then going, like drawing a line and going, no, what I'm doing I know is better than what you're asking for at the moment?
It's an interesting question. I suppose this is when my property background comes into it a little bit. So cafes can open very quickly, and so what they can do is to hit on what's trending right at that time, and so there's a relevance around it. With developments, and some of the developments I'm involved in, they can have a 5 to 10 year gestation, and for me, I'm always trying to pick what the trends are. I'm always trying to, from an entrepreneurial point of view, think about, like where's retail heading? Mm-hmm. I think the majority of people that we have as our customers are not creative enough to know what that is. And that's nothing negative. It's just that, not everybody can read a plan. People who can read a plan are way ahead. I mean, I can walk through a plan living the space as I do it. So I'm lucky in that sense. And some people also have that. What it is, taking on that advice or thinking about it in an entrepreneurial way, I think you've got to truly sort of transcend what is happening now to be successful in 2 to 3 years. For me, I could open any cafe tomorrow and sell a coffee because, you'd say, well, that's what's trending. We're selling crap loads of coffee in Australia. Everybody wants great coffee. But what's the next thing? I think to stay ahead of the game and to give people something they don't even know that they want yet is the trick, and that's the key. And I think constantly focusing on the thing that they don't know that they want is really where you need to be. And that means forecasting, thinking well ahead,
But then if we think too far ahead, right, it becomes harder to sell that vision to the majority, right?
Scalability. So you've got to scale up to it. If we had other than the cost, we couldn't have been the venue we are 5 years ago. It just wouldn't have made sense. And then social media was working, but it's not working the same as it is now. So social media is a great way for small business. But to have thrown a venue this size into the market at that time in one hit just would have been too much. So I think you've just got to be sensible about how you approach it.
Brick by brick.
Brick by brick, evolve. Have a master plan. You're mad if you don't have a solid view about where you want to end up going. But build it and they'll come. Yeah, I think that's the scalable thing, You can have the vision about how you want it to end up, but build the first bit and they'll come. I think, you just got to be sensible about what that looks like.
Is it a bit easier in this industry to be able to do that, being a very sort of direct industry? The hospitality is very much an in-person industry, whereas in others that evolve much, much faster, you simply can't predict what's going to exist in 5 years.
Hospitality, it's got so many versions, and I just think it's really struggling to reinvent itself a little bit at the moment. With 2018, but new year, I could write a list of 10 restaurants and cafes that didn't bother opening in 2018. And some really great brands and really good locations. And you sort of think, why is that happening? I mean, unfortunately, every development that occurs in an urban renewal precinct under planning schemes that allow retail or want retail to activate the edges of these precincts, comes with a new restaurant. New cafe, new retail, and developers these days, true face rents are not what they are. Face rents, developers are prepared to put millions of dollars into fit-outs. So these restaurants are moving, and new restaurants are coming out of the woodwork. They're not going to survive, but they get a free fit-out, and they might be paying pretty big rent, but maybe not day one. They get to survive in the market for a couple of years before they fail, and there's only so many meals and so many covers on a weekly basis that Brisbane, for example, can sustain. And when you then look at the advent of Uber Eats and Deliveroo and all of those, moving into dark kitchens where you don't need a retail space anymore, and you can have 3 different menus from Indian to anything else with spices like Thai. They all come out of the one kitchen, branded like they're a Thai or an Indian restaurant, and they're delivered to home. People are sitting at home watching Netflix, having a really good quality meal delivered to them. They're not going to restaurants anymore. So we're really reinventing what retail, and in particular in hospitality, is looking like at the moment. And I think staying ahead of that and staying outside of that is interesting. I mean, Uber Eats approached us, successful cafe, and when they turned around and said 30%, I went, there's not that much margin in food. I mean, and I think you'd be mad to jump into that. We're fine on our own, so there's plenty of other people can produce that food. We don't need to do it in our restaurant when we're paying, face rents of what we're paying, or ultimately with our financial model. Yeah, it's. Does that sort of answer your question?
It does.
It's a really challenging time, and I think challenging but at the same time exciting, because I think change is a good thing. You just got to know how to embrace it. You've got to be a chameleon. You've got to change with whatever the environment is throwing at you. And if you don't change, then you're very susceptible. And
yes.
A lot of these restaurants that are failing have a limited footprint. They have one fit out that's cost them a fortune, so they can't reinvent the fit out. The only thing they can do to stay ahead of the game is produce really amazing food and have a great wine list and look after their customers. Loyalty. Loyalty is another thing.
But with that, Seth Godin wrote a book called Purple Cow. The Purple Cow, or I read Free Prize Inside, and he talks about this purple cow idea that is effectively, the way I summarize it is that it's a gimmick that people talk about. So therefore it's not a gimmick anymore because people talk about it. And just sort of upgrading your product isn't necessarily, there's always a fight to upgrade the product, like a faster car or a smaller, widget. But what is it really that people talk about with you guys that makes you guys successful?
I think the evolution of the space. A lot of our loyal customers were here from day one when we were across the road in 50 square metres, and they've seen how we've evolved into a space where we're event hosts, and we hold weddings, engagements and different things here. So we've got this lovely energy and activity at the front, which is the cafe. We've got a yard that we've always talked about evolving from other than a car park to something that it morphs into something that is practical, given that we've been operating out of the space. So I think for us, the customers that we have and the loyalty around all of that is that they actually feel like they're part of the journey of building this venue. And in a way, oddly, they probably feel like they're financially supporting it. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at seed funding. So, but they get a good coffee and they get a great meal as well. So, I think they really feel part of it, and they love to hear the story about what I'm designing and what I'm doing. And when the trusses arrived, I've been sitting here for a couple of weeks now in the yard. When they arrived, it was like a tourist attraction. And if I had to tell the story once, I told it 100 times about where they came from and what I'm planning to do, and that keeps people incredibly engaged, and we're adding a more than 2/3 capacity to the venue by creating the space outdoors. Admittedly, it's mostly for function space, so that we can move into those evening functions a little bit more and hold wedding receptions here as well. But there's not many spaces can do that, and I think having the space to be able to evolve and reinvent has been really good for us. And I wouldn't say that I knew that as a tactic going forward, but in the early days, but going forward, I certainly see that as a very important strategy.
It's interesting that you described that has been a strong factor in your development and evolution, because Nick Pinn mentioned on a previous episode early on when he started Glass Bar, he just got people in and made them part of the development of the product. And that really invested them in the idea.
Yep.
And so they sort of felt like they were part of the business. Yep. And I think I'm feeling that same sort of theme come through in that answer there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
And as I say, from day one, that wasn't something that we envisaged. We realised that the venue had to grow, but it had to be sustainable to grow. So we've always had this evolution to achieve the next milestone, consolidate and justify, the additional funds to then move to the next level. And I think that's probably it's probably been one of our best engagement and marketing tools. Everybody loves to have a story. One of the funny stories is that when we started over the road in the 50 square metres, we were trying to come up with our name, and we called it Stalled Espresso. And Stalled Espresso was about the fact that we were around so many cars. There were car yards and car dealers and mechanics, and it was always about cars. So we thought, you store your engine and you want to kind of have a coffee and you can get your engine going again and keep going. So we kind of had this funny little play on the word stall. When we decided to move over the road, we thought, well, we had enough brand equity around stall with the loyalty of customers. We'll move over with that name. We didn't feel it suited the venue because we knew we were going to go into something much bigger. Hence the reason why we've called the back space, which is the function space, the Black Brisbane, which is the event space, and the yard where we're going to have the food trucks is going to be called the Black Market. So we've kind of got these three names now. But when we moved over, people still come into the back space and they go, they've figured out why it's called stall, because it's beautiful barn-like, it's got lovely timber trusses, timber. I mean, one of my mate's father's saddles on the wall, just sort of adorning it there, and they think it's stable. So stall to them is the stalls for horses. And they've done that themselves. I've thought, well, I don't need to tell them what my story around stall is. It's great that they've created that for themselves. So, it's nice. So it's funny because it's now more about stalls for horses than it is stalled the car. So it's very good.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
My question for you, James, we explored a bit about innovations happening now and that will be taking place. What do you want to see take place in terms of innovations into the future?
I think we're at a really interesting crossroad, because I think in Australia we have been dictated to by the major supermarkets who have more than 90% market share on the food and produce that they've wanted to provide us. And for them, even though we see the odd celebrity chef pop up for either brand and say that we're this and we market that, and they bring the wholesome food and seasonal stuff into it, they're really only throwing at us what they want to throw at us. Back end, in terms of how they deal with the producers, the farmers, they give no momentum or no provenance, or the whole paddock to plate phenomenon. They really pretend to be that, but they're not. Are they great at putting a supermarket into a community and making it part of a community? No, they're not. I mean, they're only interested in a big box that faces inwards, and really it doesn't connect with the community in any way, shape or form. And I think the fact that it's been like that for as long as it has, and the fact that we've got such a dominant 90% stakeholding in market share in that area, I think food and hospitality and that type of retail is in for a massive change. And I can't wait for that change to occur, and I can't wait to be on the fringe being part of that journey. Brisbane doesn't have its own markets. Adelaide, smaller population, has the Adelaide markets,
and it's great.
In Melbourne, you've got the Victoria markets. The flea market side, I could come or go, but in terms of the food market, I just love that. I mean, the energy inside that place. Every time I've been there, there's always been a school group walking through. And they go on a tour and they're learning about food, they're learning about how the markets operate, and they're learning about where food comes from. I reckon that's the journey. We've got generations now have had a disconnect through Coles and Woolies throwing up their model at us, and now thinking we're stupid enough that we can pretend that the fact that they are starting to make the inside of their stores look a little bit market-like because they throw some timber, they've taken away the suspended ceilings, so they've got more of a higher ceiling appeal. We're going to be hoodwinked into thinking that it's all authentic, and it's not. What we need is authenticity into food, authenticity connecting to the food bowls in Brisbane, Scenic Rim, Granite Belt. We don't have that connection. You've got the Rockley markets, that is also a further disconnect. So, I call the Rockley markets essentially skimmers. All they do is take the produce in, skim a profit off the top, drive out in their Mercedes, and pass it on to whoever wants to go in and grab it. I think the evolution of farmers markets, Jan Powers markets, from when they first evolved to what they are now, unfortunately I don't think they're all traditional market stall holders. I think there's a lot of people there probably go and buy from Rockley or wherever else and bring it through. But I love the idea that a great percentage of those, Northern Street markets, a great percentage of those traders are actually all farms, bringing their produce into the city, connecting their stories of what it means to produce that food on the farm, and actually engaging with city folk that don't get out to the farm a lot, and truly understanding what seasonal means, and truly understanding how you can actually cook around those seasons and what food's there. Not having a food group thrown at you 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Food isn't about that. It's I think that's where we're heading, and I think that's going to be the sea change, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's going to be a major change, and I think it's fantastic that Coles and Woolies have got such a dominance in the market, because that to me provides the opportunity. See? So
it's interesting because there are these two huge factors at play. I feel like there's a movement on the ground level to push for more in-person, what hospitality is all about, really, about this in-person connection with individuals and with the products that they're consuming, and very much ground floor. And then you've got the further detachment from the product and the service. So things like Uber Eats mean that people don't even have to go to the restaurant. They're already detached from the process. Now they can be further detached and literally just have that product delivered to them, or with Coles or Woolworths or your supermarkets that can, or Amazon or whatnot, being able to literally drop a product to you. You don't have to leave your house. So I'm really interested to see these factors coexist for a period of time.
I actually think the dominance of Coles and Woolies and the digital disruption via Uber Eats and Deliveroo and all of these things, and with the apps that you can do, and I've used it. Just recently had a baby, and there's nothing better now than not having to go out indoors, order the food, and then it comes, and it's actually very well done. And if there's something wrong with the food, you've got the opportunity, like you do with an Uber rideshare, to say it wasn't good. And so they've got to make sure their game is on in terms of quality. Everything is moving away from, it's disconnecting us. So even this digital disruption's disconnecting us. It's a pendulum, so it's swinging one way. And you just know that it's got to turn. And so the more disconnect we have, the more opportunity I see for us to figure out how to engage people, how to get community back again. A true retail hub is not a retail hub with a big box, Coles or Woolies. A true retail hub is a community where people go down. You've only got to go and look at every on-the-corner food market on a weekend and see how people engage. I think that's where the pendulum's going to swing back to. You can see it. The global trend is moving towards that. Makers, we don't want something that comes out of IKEA in a flat box anymore. We want to actually see someone making it and provide it. So, the whole resurgence of hipsters, making products and different things is something we want to read about, and there's a romance to it. So we're going to reconnect with that. I think the fact that we're losing sight of it more and more will make us want to have it back. And when we have it back, it's going to come back in spades. I think we really are we're in a really interesting 10-year phase, So I think it's exciting.
What's your creative process? How do you firstly, this is a massive question, so feel free to focus on a particular segment of it. To develop an idea, actually execute an idea, you have to start with nothing, develop that idea in your mind from some sort of stimulus. Generally, we piece different stimuli together, generate an idea, and then execute on that idea. And in business, it's just one application, it's one medium to convert our ideas into something in reality. It could be, through art or music or something else, but as business people, what we do is use that structure and that protocol, that medium, to convert ideas into something. So how do you generate those ideas and then execute them?
I mean, I don't know whether you've ever read the Edward de Bono theory of thinking hats. There's probably not enough time in this segment, but I'm sure your listeners would all appreciate that there's more than one way to look at a problem or an opportunity. And as important it is to think about it creatively, it's also very important to challenge it. In my business life, I've gone to meetings and you have different personalities in a room. And I love the black hatters, like guys that just knock an idea and there's not a creative bone in their body. I mean, you wouldn't have them at a think tank in a pink fit, because a think tank's about being creative, and it's about saying, how could we evolve this thing and just take it way beyond what's practical or whatever. But out in that hyperspace around these wonderful ideas, you go, well, of course that's not possible, but how could we scale it back? And then coming back to something that is possible, you come back with sometimes the most amazing ideas. And it's not just about the ideas, it's about being in this fundamentally inspirational space about maybe what it could be if it wasn't, if we had the tools to do that, for
Yes.
example. I mean, Elon Musk is an inspirational person. If you read how he's gone about what he's done, and I haven't read his books, so just what I read in the media and what have you, but I mean, to take in a short generational span to do what he's done is nothing short of incredible, I mean, and so it's people like that. He's not a black hatter, right?
No.
He is not a black hatter. And I think black hatters play an important role, but employ them, they call you accountant, and they'll tell you what you can and can't afford, and even when you can't afford it, you can turn around and say, you know what, I've got a bit of cash flow and I'm still going to do that, and you can still make it happen, because they're so traditionally flawed in entrepreneurial skills. And they're not all, but most accountants are. So I think my process is about considering that broader space of creativity, what's fundamentally inspirational and possible, and then scaling it back and saying, what would my first iteration look like? What could I start with that's going to generate enough income based on what my fixed costs are? Never go in without a business plan of sorts. It's easy to come up with a business planning model. You can actually get them online and do all these things. So download those, throw in the numbers, be cruel. You've got to do that. And if it makes sense in the first iteration, that's a great place to start. I think the thing that gets me there in any business or anything that I've ever done is around, it might sound really odd, but it's around branding. If I brand something and I give it a name, and I know that brand and brand equity is so important, but if I can come up with a brand and a name and actually deliver the logo, I'm almost instantly there in terms of what this product's going to look like, because the same way I can walk through a set of one-dimensional plans and understand the spatial awareness of each room and how you connect the spaces, I do the same when I've got a logo and I've got a brand around something. I can actually then look at my practical model and see how it evolves and what is it going to look like in 5 years' time, and that's what I visualise. What's it going to look like in 5 years' time? Like the outside space here and our event space, I know that we want to turn over $1 million here, year one. How do I make that happen? How do I evolve that? Not always about the money, but to get to the $1 million, you've got to kind of say, well, what do you need to scale up to achieve that? So I completely see the vision of what our outside area is looking like. I completely see how this area changes. I completely see the commercial kitchen coming in, which is another phase. Yeah, I just see that evolution, and I think being able to visualise is really, really tough.
How do you get into that state, though?
I think you've either got it or you haven't, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a business skill that you can actually teach people. I think you've either got it or you haven't. I mean, someone's an entrepreneur, someone's not. Someone might have an idea, but an entrepreneur can take it to the point where it's marketable.
I want to disagree. I want to disagree because I want to believe that people can learn that skill. Because I believe everyone is inherently creative. Really, that it's practicing that creative thinking. But no, you disagree?
I disagree. I mean, at the end of the day, I'll give you a practical example. You've got 10 friends, you walk into each of their homes, and you'll have a look at what each of them have done with their interiors. How have they styled the place? I could see a scale from here to here. I love every one of those people, but some are just bloody hopeless at it. They don't understand getting they get a mismatch of styles, they don't understand colours, they just get it so wrong. And I'm sorry, but in business it's the same. It's not just about the styling, but it's actually how you pull this thing together. And some people are not capable of that. And probably great that you aren't, because you can't have all these creative people in the world. Yeah. We've all got different skill sets. They're good at other things, but to be that true entrepreneur is to actually say, where I want to be in 5 years' time, visualise every aspect of it. And in your mind you've already built it, so essentially you're already there. You just get frustrated that it's not happening quick enough.
That's right.
That's my problem.
I'm totally with you. I'm certainly further on the creative end than the black hat end myself. I need those black hatters around to be like, yeah, you can't do that. But this is super interesting.
I think the key to anything in life, and so therefore in that creative space that you're saying people should be able to do, the key is to know enough to know what you don't know. It's something that I've lived by. So, limited knowledge, an old saying, is a dangerous thing, and I think that's the beginning of where I come up with that philosophy. But know enough to know what you don't know means you have to know enough to get to a point where you don't try and fake it. You just know enough, and you know that you don't have the skills to do that. So if you're not good at interiors, but you can walk around and see 10 cafes that inspire you, so you might have a board of different photos saying this is kind of what I really would want my cafe to look like, then go and get someone who's bloody good at that to do it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm lucky enough that I can do it. My wife and I do it, and we love doing it. We agree on 9 times out of 10 things. Occasionally we don't agree, but we always get there. I'm just lucky that we can do that. But go and resource that thing that you are limited in the skill to be able to do. Really important.
On your journey, is there someone that you've looked up to or who's been a bit of a mentor for you?
It's an interesting thing because I've probably got about 2 or 3 people that use me as a bit of as a mentor. I think that, I suppose it was always going to get to a point, sometime someone would ask me that question, but no, I've never had a mentor. I've never been one to read books on someone's success. I have done a little bit of that, but you know, it's not a thing I go and like a sponge want to mop that up to see how someone's done it to be successful. Could I recreate that? I've not gone to seminars of self-improvement or how can I be better at what I'm doing. And I've never really had the mentor. I guess I've just been a bit of a sponge around business models and the way to get ahead in this world. I mean, the system, this is a bit over a glass of wine, the system really is about levelling us all. You know, they want us to all be in a level playing field. It's very, very difficult to think of business models that can actually leverage you financially beyond that model to achieve something, to actually be much better in business, to then employ more people and actually be a better corporate citizen around how you can participate in this financial model that we have going on in Australia. I mean, governments are so bloody inefficient at spending the money we give them as taxes. That's why we're taxed so much, because they're inefficient. They're even inefficient in understanding the tools they've got to give small business in order to get them successful, to leverage beyond where they are, to create a certain amount of wealth so that we can actually kind of give back, employ, and, be a better country in that sense. So no, I've not had a mentor. I'm not really good at taking advice from people, so it's probably one of my failings. But I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and as everybody would tell you, man who hasn't made a mistake hasn't made anything. So it's a positive thing. Draw positives from it. Just don't make the same mistake twice. Yeah.
I like that one. So, man who hasn't made a mistake hasn't made anything.
That's it.
I'd like to ask you, James, in the last couple of questions, what's your biggest challenge right now?
I've got a lot, but I won't bore you with the big ones. I have got a major development out at Lutwyche, and we're trying to do all sorts of things with that. And the idea about the markets that I spoke about, I really want that for Lutwyche. That challenge, even though I won't go into detail, is actually about changing markets and changing perceptions. So, while I want that change and I want that community, you've got lending institutions that want a signed lease by Coles or Woolies in order to fund it. It's a big project and it needs a lot of funding. That is a challenge, so it's kind of moving away from the norm and having key players like institutions like banks be prepared to jump out of their comfort zone and back something like that. That's that challenge. The challenge I've got here is that I'm a busy man in business, but I love doing all this work myself. I would hate to think in this cafe and function space and with what I'm doing outside, I'd hate to think what it would have cost me if I had had a contractor come in and do it. Fortunately, I'm practical, and I was a builder in a past life. I can modify things and I can adapt. I can do things fundamentally very cheaply. That sort of comes with its problems, because while I'm very busy at running businesses and doing what I'm doing, I like to be hands-on and do this project. So my one challenge for this business is actually maintaining so many hours a week to do what I need to do to keep everything else going, and yet throwing on a hammer and nail pocket and actually getting this work done out here. And I find it really hard to let that go to somebody else, because it'll cost me 3 times as much and they'll probably stuff it up. I might have a plan, but as I build things, I like it to evolve. And so if I see something that sort of needs to change, I'll change it and it won't cost me anything. If I've got someone doing it, they'll just do it, and I'll tell them to do it, they'll do it like a parrot, and I won't get that creativity in that I like. So that's my challenge, is having enough time in the day to do the things that I want to do. I've managed to get the cafe and the function space to this point. Done it 99% of it myself, so
yes,
I'll forge ahead.
We've all got that same finite resource.
We have,
fortunately or unfortunately, yeah.
Yes.
My second last question for you, my penultimate question for you, James, is what plans do you have for the industry and the way that you want to contribute ultimately?
Well, I mean, that is sort of has a two-level answer because I'm down, you've got macro and micro. I mean, where I am with this cafe, it's really small. I don't think there's anything that I could do here that would set a trend. I think that we can create something that we know our customers love, and we can create a space that, people will want to get married in, and it'll be very different. That doesn't define me. It's not an absolute legacy project. The one that actually means the most to me is the development that I'm doing, and that's probably a whole other story. But I mean, I think that I would like to be a contributor to redefining what we do with our children and how we shop and how we relate to one another in a community space. I mean, in a sense, this cafe is a little bit like that. I see businesses come together here, so they talk, they bump into one another. It's like a breakout space on a full floor fit out in an office building in the CBD, Rather than having individual offices, they have breakout areas and everybody then communicates and talks, and it's a much more productive type of environment. I mean, I see communities being something similar. I see our cafe being that. I see how it connects people in business. I see how it connects people through families, with a dance school, cricket nearby. It's a wonderful thing to provide a footprint and an ambience, and provide the basis for people coming together through coffee and a bit of food to see that evolve. So I guess in a small way that's important for me and Kirsty, but on a larger scale, my legacy for the industry, if I can be lucky enough to deliver it, is to redefine how we buy food and how we relate to it. And it's a bit of a cliche these days, but the whole paddock to plate thing, we just got to keep forging on that, and we can't let these massive conglomerates who are just about creating profits for shareholders dictate how we should be living our lives and disconnect us from our food bowls and tell us what food we should be eating when we should be making those decisions ourselves in a much more informed way. So that would be my legacy, and that would be what I'd love to be able to do. So.
On that note, thank you very much for being on the show today, James. It's been very insightful, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure.
Stay in touch with the show after hours at Hospopreneurs on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Do you know a hospopreneur? Shoot us an email, hospopreneurs@gmail.com. Creativity and innovation in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.